Welcome Dean, who will talk about 25 years of circadian living, a case study.
Thank you very much. And thank you once again to VELUX for the invitation. It's always a treat to be at this symposium and other events organised by them. I've been asked to do a little extra at the beginning of this talk by Michel. Yesterday, on a number of occasions, he specifically, but other people, made reference to Louis Kahn. Now, I was an architecture student between 1956 and 1962 in Manchester, and that period coincided absolutely with that moment when Kahn produced that sequence of late and wonderful buildings that had such a profound influence on architects of my generation, and I think for architects of subsequent generations, as I think was evidenced by those references to him yesterday. Now, at some point in one of the intervals yesterday, I whispered in Michel's ear that I wondered how many people in the room actually had met Kahn. How many? I did. I will very briefly explain the circumstances. In 1965, after I graduated from architecture in Manchester, I went to London, to Cambridge, to begin my PhD studies with Leslie Martin, the great head of that school. And one Sunday morning in 1972, my telephone rang, and it was Leslie. And Leslie never rang people on Sundays. And he said, "Are you busy?" And if the professor rings you and asks you that question, what do you answer? Well, I had lots of things to do, but I said, well, not particularly. Why? And he said, well, I wondered if you might like to come down to the school for a coffee. It was quite bizarre. I said, he said, I said, Leslie, yes? He said, because I have Lou with me, Lou Kahn. And on the Friday evening, Lou Kahn had received a Royal Gold Medal in architecture from the RIBA in London. And Leslie, being Leslie, had invited him to Cambridge for the weekend. I said, I thought it might be rather agreeable if half a dozen of us or so came to the school and had some coffee with Lou. Would you like to come? I said, what can you say? So I went there and spent 2 hours with 6 or 7 other people in a small room with Louis Kahn. We didn't know what to say to him, of course. And he said, but he didn't want to talk about himself. He said, look, you're young people embarking on this great adventure of the development of research in architecture. Tell me about you. And that was an indication of generosity of them. So, I will stop that story now and come back to this other business down up there. So maybe you can tell your grandchildren that one wet Thursday in Berlin in 2007, you sat in a room with a man who once sat in a room with Lou Kahn. To my proper subject. It seems a long time ago. I find symposia and conferences a little bit like long-haul flights. You know, you begin, it's all neat and tidy, and it goes on, it becomes kind of untidy. And then before you land, they come around and tidy it all up. We're not quite approaching our landing yet, but it seems a long time ago yesterday morning. But Stefan Banish said something I wrote down. When you finish a building, it becomes less interesting. I want, with respect to Stefan, I thought his talk was wonderful, slightly to contradict him. A few years ago, I was invited by VELUX to contribute to the project that led to production of the Principles and Guidelines for Healthy Homes, the Circadian House, published in November 2013. Now, certainly you all have a copy, but you can download it from the website, the Daylight website, of course. And those principles, and I won't go through them in any detail, I'm certain most of you know them. The key principles, three categories: to live in balance with nature, to make buildings which have adaptability, and which have sensibility. And then there are a series of key factors. I'll just leave them on the screen, but I'm not going to go through them. And again, much of what's been going on in the last day and a half has touched upon many of these questions. Now, my contribution to that conversation in Copenhagen was to talk about something I think is very important and has perhaps been not sufficiently emphasized in this meeting, which is the thing that I call antecedents. And I went with some images and descriptions of buildings which seemed to me to be antecedents for the idea of circadian living. And most of the buildings I showed, not by any means all of them, were from the English arts and crafts movement, that great moment at the end of the 19th into the beginning of the 20th century, when a series of wonderful architects, Charles Voysey, Charles Rennie Mackintosh in Scotland, and this wonderful man, M.H. Bailey Scott, throughout England, but very particularly in a number of instances in Cambridge, made these wonderful houses. This is the north facade, photographed very early in the morning in summer, so you get sun on the north facade. It speaks about all sorts of wonderful things about how we make buildings for people. That enormous roof tells you that it's sheltered in there, you're protected. The giant chimneys tell you there is warmth in the winter. The south facade looks like that. Completely different. And something which has been touched upon a number of times in the last day and a half has been the question of orientation and the difference between what I call northness and southness, which is particularly relevant at these kinds of latitudes. Cambridge is at a latitude of 62 north, almost exactly the latitude of Berlin. Berlin is about 0.4 of a degree north of Cambridge. I'm very familiar with where the sun is in the sky in these kind of places. And there is the living room in that house. You have a bay window where you can sit in the sun on a winter's morning when the sun's shining and be warm. You can go out into a garden through a door just to the right when the climate is clement, that wonderful word, the opposite of inclement. When it's dark and cold and in the winter, you can retreat into that ingle nook, this great English invention, and sit by a fire with a little bit of light over your right shoulder, and you can be warm. It is proto-circadian. That seems to me an important point, that yes, we research into all these complex and rich factors that bear upon the design of buildings. But throughout the history of architecture, great architects have understood those factors implicitly, and they reflect them and express them in their buildings. I finished my little contribution to that meeting in Copenhagen with an image of a little house I built in 1991. It's for my wife, but I live there with her, which is very nice. Which is also proto-circadian. This is a view taken at the winter solstice, 2011, and you can see the sun shining from the right, the south. We're looking eastwards from the west front. And you can see on the left a very simple block of building with a high south side, which of course more of that to come, with a screen wall at the front which creates a little microclimate before you enter, and the block which is red, which contains space that wouldn't fit in the other block, essentially. 18 months ago, the RIBA rang me up and asked if I would make a contribution to their annual research symposium, and would I talk about this house. And I said, yes, I'd be pleased with that, rather flattered. And I said, what's the theme of the day? It says, design for aging. Well, so I said, well, you know, I just designed a little house for Christine and myself. They said, yes, but you're now old. So maybe there are lessons. And I actually thought that was a very good and important question. And what I did when I made my presentation, I actually presented this house as an exemplar of circadian design. It's proto-circadian, but it is actually circadian. So what I want to do is very quickly to show you some images of this house and to try to offer a narrative of 25 years of gradual decline, but actually of a wonderful word that the great Rainer Banham, who we occasionally mention in this context, Banham, the architecture of a well-tempered environment. Banham coined a wonderful phrase. He offered as the opposite to survival the concept of thrival. And isn't that wonderful? You know, and I think we've kind of thrived. You can look at me after 25 years and make your own judgments. But what I'll do is just very quickly to take you through some images of the house. There's a plan. North is up and slightly to the left. The long block on the north boundary with no windows in the wall contains, reading from left to right, a guest room, which is a room with a bed, a kitchen with a little shower bathroom in a little pod. Beyond that, a living room, which contains all of the functions of domestic dwelling. Beyond that, a master bedroom with a bathroom and a closet. Then the piece that plugs in and closes it off is a study. That was what the house was when we first built it. When I retired from the university 15 years ago and came home with 1,000 books, there was nowhere to put the books, nor really to put me, because my wife, who taught English, said, you're not coming in the study, the singular study. So at the bottom right is a tiny little cell, smaller than Le Corbusier's cabinet, which is where the 1,000 books and I were put. The house observes passive solar principles. Here are those cross-sections that we architects, environmental architects, love to draw, showing the sun angle at summer. Solar altitude at noon in summer in Cambridge is 62 degrees. And you can see just a cross-section through the living room, which has a tall bay window and a high space with a curved ceiling. And you can see that the sun is kept entirely on the edge of the space. In winter, the leaves have fallen from the trees. The draftsman knew about that. The sun comes through the trees and strikes the back wall of the room and brings light and warmth with it. The house has been monitored by endless graduate students from Cambridge over the years. They variously have calculated and measured and analysed that we get between 30 and 40% of our annual heat requirement from passive solar, which is not bad for a house built in 1991. The U values were all better than 0.2 when we built it. Anyway, back now to the image. What I'm going to do is we're going to see the house and walk around it. That is the house 3 weeks ago, tomorrow, spring. We planted a little apple tree, which was this high when we moved in 25 years ago, and there it is now. The apple tree, a symbol of paradise, not entirely frivolously meant. And it's grown and flourished and produces an abundant crop of eating apples every year. We move into this little courtyard behind that wall, more of that later, and the door opens, and we're in an entrance hall. The house is 90 square meters, plus my cell now. You come into a space which is deliberately dark, with dark colours, a dark floor, and you see ahead to the living room, which is lit from the south, and you can't see where the light comes from. If the doors are open on the right, if my wife allows that, you can look in and you see her room. It's also a sitting room. She allows me in the evenings to watch TV. You'll notice that the carpet is blue. I'll say more about carpets and colours later. If we turn left, we proceed toward the kitchen. A white space. It's completely trapped into the body of the house, and it's lit by a tall clerestory high up, which also does stack ventilation. It's painted entirely white. It has this curved, half-vaulted ceiling again. All the units are white. It's all about the internal reflected component of daylight factor. I was an apprentice with R.G. Hopkinson in my early research days. You know, it stuck. And you have this beautiful whiteness. And you can stand at those worktops with perfect light to chop your vegetables and not your fingers. As you move back towards, you can go around this little bathroom pod, which is in the red piece. You head back towards the entrance. There's a clerestory. There's an owl, a ceramic owl that sits, gazes down. We're called hawks, so we have birds everywhere. And then you come to the living room. This is a winter view, but we'll see more later. You stand at that threshold, and you see this space. There, the curved ceiling is now timber, and that was deliberately to reduce, we've heard much about this again from a theoretical standpoint, to reduce the reflected component and to change the tonality of the space. And you see a blue carpet once more. You see that space looking the other way. That's a little like the first image. That's a morning image. The other one on the left is an evening image. The bay window is an edicule. We have a table and 2 chairs. We eat our meals there. It projects into the garden. We're surrounded by nature, suburban nature. This is a suburban site. It's 3 kilometres from the centre of Cambridge. We sit in there. In summer, the trees have leaves on. In winter, they don't, and so on. We enjoy all of that. And then we have our bedroom, which is just a room with books and a bed and curtains. They're the only curtains in the house. We have blinds on all the windows otherwise, but we draw those curtains as a kind of theatrical moment, you know. And you will notice the carpet is grey. Where we have carpets in day rooms, they're blue for the day sky. In the night rooms have grey carpets for the grey sky. The guest room, which I'm not going to show you, is a very boring, ordinary room. That is a tour of the house. Now, very quickly, I will look at some of the temporal dimensions of the house, seasonal and diurnal. This is a photograph taken on 28th of June, 1992, when the house was first built. A beautiful photograph taken at noon. And you can see, translating that sectional diagram into reality, you see that the sun's edge contained in this limit of the space. The interior of the space is in the shade. It's also a kind of image, it's a kind of thermal image of space. On a hot summer's day, you don't sit at the edge, or if you do, to have your lunch, you draw the blind down. Simple gestures that work. But if you want to be cool, and as we've aged, one of the things that does happen is that one lives in an ever-shrinking environmental envelope. The temperature range we can tolerate shrinks. Lighting levels, our visual acuity declines, of course. Hearing suffers in various ways. But you can actually go inwards in that room, into the cool, even on a hot summer's day. Or, of course, you can go into the garden and sit in the shade of a tree. That's the room looking the other way, but that's a November afternoon. Light coming in and bringing warmth. You can be in there when it's 3 degrees outside, no heat on, and be perfectly comfortable and warm. The courtyard at the front, facing west, has a little table and 2 chairs. We're 2 people. We're not very friendly. We are actually very friendly, but sometimes on summer's evenings, there's no passing traffic. We're at the end of a lane. We sit out there with cool drinks and occasionally say hello to our neighbours. The sun's round to the west, so we do that. In the rear garden, there on the right is my cell, with a clerestory which lights the books which occupy the whole rear wall, a window that puts top left-hand light onto my drawing board. I still have a drawing board, and my computer screen is out of any glare situation. And you can just see the tall bay window rising up. That's a summer view with, and we have lunch there, and sometimes dinner, although the sun has disappeared by dinner time. That's midday, a tiny microclimate. The little garden is the biggest room of the house, and essentially between the equinoxes, spring and autumn equinox, we dwell there. It rarely snows in Cambridge, but I thought I should show you that it does. I think it snowed 5 times in 25 years and gone by lunchtime. But this shows the house on one of those days when it snowed, with a cloudless blue sky and solar warmth in that interior. This is the bay window. It's a place we spend so much time. And of course, since we now have wireless Wi-Fi in the house, we take our laptops around. We follow comfort in the house, of course, which of course you can do. And my wife occasionally says, you can't sit at your breakfast table for long because I'm taking my laptop there. You know. But that is a very beautiful place to be. And then just almost to the end, these were taken 3 weeks ago, more or less the same camera view, looking east. That's a morning shot. At noon, we have simulations, but we have realities here. That's midday. Leaves now on the trees, and you can see the dappled effect of the shading. And then in the evening, the sunlight slanting at the bottom is because of internal reflections within the sealed double-glazed units of the windows, and you get sunshine going both ways. I'd never guess. And it's actually rather beautiful, but of course it's less intense than the direct effect. Looking from the study back into the hall, late afternoon, it looks like that. We don't often sit looking at the pod that contains the lavatory, but we do occasionally. An hour later, 3 weeks ago, it looked like that because the sun had come around. And the reflection off the red back on the white. Just a very brief period of absolute delight. And then occasionally, and again you could simulate all of this, I believe you create a building in which the potential for these kind of moments is implicit. But I don't need to simulate them. I prefer to discover them in the building. I want to eliminate by calculation error. I don't necessarily want to try to predict delight. This is late afternoon in summer. The sun shines in through the bay window and slants onto the curved timber ceiling and bursts on that white wall. Then, of course, night time, and won't say very much about it, but quite elaborate artificial lighting installation with lots of switching, dimmers, and so on. In 25 years, all the lamps have been converted to low energy, of course. That angle poise was our first LED, and we put light where we need it when we read, of course, as our eyesight fades. And then from the garden, you can look into the house with bright light. It brings light out into the outside space. And finally, we go to bed. Thank you very much.
Thank you.